Hello and welcome. Today we are diving into a legal idea that's really all about fairness, about consistency, and, the simple power of a promise. It's called the Doctrine of Estoppel. Now I know, it sounds a little complicated, but trust me, it's a core principle that affects every single one of us, in everything from simple agreements to huge court battles.
So, let's just start with a question that gets right to the heart of it all. What happens when you rely on someone's word? You change your plans, maybe you spend money based on what they said, and then they just change their story. What happens then? Does the law actually have your back?
Just imagine this. Your lease says in black and white, no pets. But your landlord looks you in the eye and says, don't worry about it, it's fine. So you get a dog, you buy all the stuff, you fall in love with the little guy, and then a year later, an eviction notice shows up citing that exact clause. It just feels wrong, doesn't it? Well, that exact feeling of injustice is what the law of estoppel is built to fix.
And yet the law does have an answer. It's a really powerful tool called estoppel, and its entire job is to step in and prevent the kind of harm and downright unfairness that happens when someone goes back on their word after you've already relied on it. So what is it exactly? Well, to put it simply, estoppel stops someone, or estops them, from taking a contradictory position. If what they said or did before made you believe something was true, the law can literally prevent them from denying it later if that would end up hurting you. It's the law's way of saying, nope, you said it, you're sticking to it. And look, this isn't just some rigid technical thing. As this really important Malaysian case points out, at its core, estoppel is all about equity. It's a flexible idea that courts use to make sure things are just and fair, especially when following the strict letter of the law would lead to a terrible result.
In Malaysia, this whole idea is actually written down in the Evidence Act. You can almost think of it like a legal recipe with 3 key ingredients. First, you need a clear representation. That can be a statement, an action, or even just not doing anything. Second, it had to be intended for the other person to act on it. And third, and this is crucial, that person did act on it and they would suffer some kind of loss if the first person suddenly changed their tune.
Let's see how this actually works in the real world. In this one case, you had an electricity board that knew a company's meter was broken, but they did nothing for years. Their inaction basically sent a message, everything's fine. The company, of course, relied on this, setting their budgets based on the bills they were getting. So when the board suddenly turned around and demanded a huge back payment, the court said, no way. They were estopped. It was just too unfair to do that after all that time.
Now, estoppel isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It really has 2 main forms, and a fantastic way to think about them is as a legal shield and a sword. They do different things, but they both come from that same basic principle of fairness.
And this is where we see a really key difference. On one side, you have promissory estoppel. That's the shield. You use it as a defense to stop someone from using a right they promised they wouldn't. Then on the other side, you have proprietary estoppel. That's the sword. It's way more proactive. You can use it to actually create a brand new right for yourself, but it's usually about property.
So let's look closer at the shield. This is the one you would use in our landlord situation. See, you already have a legal relationship, the lease. The landlord then makes a clear promise not to enforce that no pets rule. You rely on it, you get the dog, and it would be totally unfair for them to just go back on that promise to kick you out. You use estoppel as your defense, your shield. The sword, though, that's different. This is all about property. Imagine a farmer tells his son, don't you worry, one day all this land will be yours. And based on that promise, his son spends the next 20 years working the farm for barely any pay, pouring his own money and sweat into improving the place. Proprietary estoppel could be used as a sword to actually give him a legal right to that land, because he relied on that promise to his own detriment. But the role of estoppel doesn't stop with promises between people. It's also absolutely critical for making sure the justice system itself works. It helps make sure that once something is decided, it stays decided. Think about it for a second. If a court makes a final decision on something, should the person who lost be allowed to just start a new case and try to argue that exact same point all over again? It would be total chaos, right? It would clog the courts and just be a nightmare for the person who won.
The law's answer to that is a very firm no, and it's delivered through a tool called issue estoppel. It's a simple rule, but it's so important. Once a court has made a final decision on a specific issue between 2 parties, that's it. That issue is settled. You can't drag it up again in another lawsuit. It brings finality to justice.
There's another side to fairness here, and it's all about time. The law pretty much runs on this principle. It's there to help people who are proactive, who are vigilant about their rights. It's not there for people who just sit on their hands and wait forever.
An unreasonable delay can be just as unfair as a broken promise.
This case is a perfect example. A person waited for more than 10 years to make a legal claim. In that decade, the other person, thinking the whole thing was over, invested a ton of money and completely changed their position. The court basically said, "You waited too long. The delay caused way too much harm." The claimant was stopped by their own inaction, something the law calls latches.
Okay, so we've been through the theory, the different types, the court cases. But why does any of this really matter to you? Well, because these ideas of fairness and consistency are completely woven into our everyday lives, and especially into business. So let's just boil it down and focus on 3 key areas where getting a handle on estoppel is absolutely critical if you want to protect yourself.
First, client communication. You have to remember that your informal assurances, all those "don't worry about it" comments, they can have real legal weight. Second, when you're drafting contracts, you're going to see these no-waiver clauses. They are literally put in there to try and stop these kinds of estoppel arguments from ever starting. And third, in any negotiation, consistency is everything. What you say and what you do creates expectations, and the law can absolutely hold you to them.
You know, when it's all said and done, it comes back to this one simple, powerful idea. The doctrine of estoppel is the law's way of holding people to their word. It makes sure you can't just flip your story when it's convenient, especially when doing that is going to hurt someone who trusted you.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. We live in this age of texts, emails, DMs, where informal promises are made every single second. In a world like this, how vital is this centuries-old principle of fairness and holding people to their word? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.